Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie with your top stories. Stock futures fall and havens surge as President Trump threatens new tariffs on European allies in his pursuit of a Greenland takeover. Fury in European capitals with leaders set to hold an emergency meeting to discuss retaliatory measures. French President Emmanuel Macron calls for Europe to use its trade bazooka against the US. Plus, China's economic momentum weakens despite meeting its 5% GDP goal. Another year of lopsided growth for the world's second biggest market. Let's check in on the markets and risk off across the equity markets. The US, of course, closed for President's Day, but you're seeing the downside reflected, of course, in European futures. In terms of the picture then, down 1.3% on this renewed tariff threat from President Trump. S&P E-minis pointing lower by 0.9% when the US markets reopen after that holiday. Gold is getting a bid. That safe haven move is there. You're seeing that in silver as well. The yellow metal up 1.6%, closing in to $4,700 per troy ounce. Here are your risk events of the day and of the week then. Thinking through to Wednesday, Donald Trump at Davos. Wow, what a moment that's going to be given this tariff threat around Greenland. Thursday, we're going to get US core PCE, so that key gauge, of course, for the Federal Reserve in terms of the inflation momentum in the US. And on Friday, as we think about the politics of Japan, the Bank of Japan interest rate decision will come through at the end of the week. So, Bloomberg understands EU leaders will convene for an emergency meeting this week over President Trump's latest tariff threat. The leaders are set to explore possible retaliatory measures after Donald Trump vowed to impose 10% tariffs on 8 European countries, countering his pursuit of Greenland. Let's bring in Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crick, in Brussels. Ollie, tell us about what exactly has been threatened by President Trump and how European leaders have so far reacted.
Yeah, Tom, that was a deep inhale there from you, and I can understand because if you blinked, you basically could have missed what happened last Saturday night over the weekend when we heard from President Trump and just detailing precisely what Trump has now done here. He's taken to target those 8 European countries, most of whom have basically sent some kind of military delegation to Greenland. We should say a very symbolic military delegation. We're talking about rather fewer than 40 or 50 soldiers overall, saying that basically all of you are basically contravening my effort to take over Greenland. So these 8 nations, which are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, will all face 10% tariffs beginning February the 1st for their contribution to basically solidarity with Greenland, and that will ramp up on June the 1st to a 25% tariffs. And now everything that we've heard from European leaders so far out on Twitter, the comments that have been made elsewhere, has been in total unity with Greenland. We also heard from the European Council President, Antonio Costa, who convened an emergency meeting of EU leaders here in Brussels on Thursday, saying that there is unity on the principles of international law, territorial integrity, unity in support and solidarity with Denmark and Greenland, readiness to defend themselves against any form of coercion, and of course readiness to continue to engage constructively with the U.S. on all issues of common interest. So that emergency meeting will be taking place here in Brussels on Thursday, convening all of these European leaders to try to figure out what their collective response would be. We should say that in the last hour, we have also heard from Donald Trump out on Truth Social, saying that NATO has been telling Denmark for 20 years that you have to get ready for the Russian threat away from Greenland. Unfortunately, Denmark has been unable to do anything about it. Now it is time, and it will be done. So Donald Trump really ramping it up over the last hour. We've also heard now from the last few minutes from the Swedish Prime Minister says that we will not be blackmailed. Only Denmark and Greenland will decide matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. I will always stand for my country and for our allied neighbors. The EU will stand firm.
OK, yeah, the economic coercion and the response to that. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as well, Ollie, seen by many investors as kind of the adult in the room when it comes to the Trump administration, isn't backing down on these threats. Let's take a listen to what he's been saying.
If there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States, and There will not be a conflict because the United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength.
Ollie, what happens to the US-EU trade deal in this situation?
Yeah, the irony is, of course, Tom, is that if the Europeans actually sort of roll over and give in to the United States, they will be projecting weakness, and that will be sort of satisfying exactly what Scott Besson is talking about there versus on their weakness versus Greenland. I think the real question for European leaders here is where is the red line for Europe? They have basically rolled over and given the Trump administration everything they want so far over the last year. The question is this Greenland question a step too far? The European Parliament is supposed to vote on the trade deal that was agreed with the United States back in July. That was supposed to happen 10 days from now. That is likely not going to happen, Tom. That's not necessarily been officially stated, but there's not a way in which they can vote on this deal, get it through, while the United States is effectively threatening another trade war. We've heard also from Emmanuel Macron, who has been sort of quick on the draw of the anti-coercion instrument. This is a sort of new instrument that was devised by the European Union in order to be able to retaliate against, effectively, Trump and the United States if ever there were another trade war. And that would basically give the EU powers to act very swiftly in retaliating against trade with the United States, but also against tech companies, procurement contracts, that sort of thing. So that is certainly on the table. And then there are, of course, these measures, the retaliation measures that the EU came up with last year that have actually been put on ice. They have never been officially kind of totally withdrawn. And there was another decision to be made on that on February the 6th. And that is basically now a very live deadline, because if the Trump administration moves forward on February the 4th on these sort of February the 1st on these decision to actually impose tariffs on the Europeans will be considering the ways that they retaliate. For the time being, they want to negotiate. They want to keep the discussion active. Obviously, Trump is in Davos this week, so they're hoping to take that opportunity to have those conversations with the President of the United States. But at the end of the day, this may be the red line for the Europeans, where they say, basically, enough is enough. We will retaliate if you do not sort of come to the table in this discussion. Of course, Tom, that carries a great economic risk, to say nothing of the risk that it carries for Ukraine and the support for the United States. But that's going to be all part of the calculus for these European leaders as they meet on Thursday.
A remarkable moment. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook in Brussels. Ollie, thank you. So President Trump's latest tariff threats then have pushed European and US futures lower this morning, as we mentioned, with gold and silver jumping as traders seek haven assets. Let's bring in Ven Rand, cross-asset strategist for Bloomberg MLive. Then let's look at the market reaction then and zero in on what's happening in the FX space. There's actually a bounce and a move up in the euro, despite potential 25% tariffs if we get to June the 1st. Additional tariffs on Europe. Is that a rational move for you? What's underpinning euro strength in this environment?
Morning, Tom. The markets are thinking that, look, what has happened in a nutshell is about geopolitical risk. It's about US assets, not so much about Europe. And that's how the markets are treating it. If you look at the markets, the cross-section of markets, there's been a huge flight into gold, which is the move into real assets and away from non-fiat currencies. And the most glaring of those fiat currencies is, of course, the US dollar, because it is funded by, the US to a great extent depends on the kindness of strangers, because it's got to fund its trade deficits, whereas that's not the case with Europe, which is a net external creditor to the global economy. So there is a natural buoyancy, there's a natural flow of funds into Europe, and that is what today's move shows into Europe. And the markets are saying, essentially, this is a geopolitical risk. This is not so much about Europe.
Yeah, you mentioned gold, and of course that price around gold and silver jumping on the back of this. I want to get your views as well then in terms of what we heard when it comes to the Fed. So we're going to switch focus, because this is also important for the markets, if not today, then into the future, which is the Fed pick, of course, and that debate as to where President Trump has landed. We hear that Rick Ryder is now emerging as a front runner, and that potentially Kevin Hassett is out of the race.
Well, it does certainly seem like Kevin Hassett is out of the race, but I'm not too sure whether the markets are going to pivot between Kevin Walsh and Rick Ryder. But the thing is, Rick Ryder has said previously that he wants a 3% rate. That's not too far off where the markets are thinking. The markets are thinking 2 rate cuts. So a third rate cut is not out of the question if we get a dovish Fed. But the question is, what happens to front-end yields? If you look at the 2-year yield, Tom, it doesn't move too far away from 350, which is kind of unusual if you think about the trajectory of the Fed. So the markets are saying, you know what, you can have the rate that the Fed wants, but not necessarily the yields that the Fed wants. And that's the message, whether it's going to be radar or wash.
OK. Ven, thank you. Bloomberg's Ven Ram on the market reaction, of course, to Trump tariff threats and changes around how we think about who could be in the running for the Fed chair position. Let's cross over right now to Asia. Standing by for us, Winnie Su in Hong Kong with a check on the Asian markets. Winnie, what's standing out to you this morning?
Yeah, morning, Tom. It is basically a risk-off session in Asia as well. However, we are seeing that the MSCI Asia right now fluctuating a bit, rebounding from earlier losses with gains led by the Kospi index. We're talking about South Korea's Kospi index up more than 1.5% and first time crossing that 4,900 level and has been rising for the past 12 sessions already. Now, flip the board and take a closer look at what's going on in the Japanese market, because bucking kind of the overall weakening trend in the benchmark, we actually are seeing that the food index here specifically up slightly less than 2%, and that's being driven by this local report saying that the ruling party is now considering a tax cut when it comes to food, and that is also weighing on concerns around fiscal budget, and hence that's why we're seeing the 30-year yield actually rising more than 10 basis points here. Now, in terms of the Japanese yen rising a little bit on that haven asset appeal, but we will be closely watching out for Takaichi's presser later today on her plan when it comes to the snap election expected next month, but also, like you mentioned earlier, the Bank of Japan's rate decision later this week. Now, flip a board and take a look at the eco data that we got from China as we take a closer look at the quick breakdown. When it comes to the year-over-year, the annual growth, it actually met a target. However, when it comes to the quarterly, the performance up 4.5% year over year, and that is actually the slowest quarterly growth since 2022. And when it comes to that combination of slightly weaker retail sales but slightly stronger industrial output, it really still goes to show how there is still that imbalance in the Chinese economy when it comes to the strength on the manufacturing side, but then the weakness on the domestic demand side. Back to you, Tom.
Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Winnie, thank you. Let's dive deeper into the Chinese economy then and the data that's come through. Losing momentum, as Winnie was saying, in the last quarter, despite meeting that 5% government target around growth. Let's bring in Chief Asia Economist at Bloomberg Economics, Chung Shu, with some details and analysis. Chung, just talk us through then how this positions the Chinese economy for 2026 and the kind of levers that the policymakers in Beijing may be looking to pull to support this economy.
Yeah, I think, as just reported earlier, there's some good news, but more so on the weak side of the economy. In terms of the positive news, the economy has been very resilient on the external front. We saw the China's exports was very strong in 2025, which supported the production side. And looking into 2026, the external front should continue to provide strong support for China, because we see in the last few weeks progress has been made in China easing trade tensions with major partners. This major trade deal reached with Canada, and discussions with EU is progressing. So that's sort of positive side. But yes, indeed, the domestic demand is pretty weak. We saw consumption decelerating very sharply in the last few months of the year. And more worryingly, the investment side. We know the government spending on big projects is a major lever for government support, and yet investment is weakening. So that's pretty concerning. So going forward, we do see the government providing more support and quickly.
OK, so we do expect more support, and we'll be watching for those measures from policymakers in Beijing. Chung Shu, thank you very much indeed. Chief Asia Economist at Bloomberg Economics, with the context there. Now, heads of state, business leaders and some of the world's richest people are, of course, descending on Davos for the annual World Economic Forum. Our extensive coverage kicking off today with interviews including the Investcorp Executive Chair, Franklin Templeton's CEO, Jenny Johnson, of course, HSBC Bank CEO, Michael Roberts, and the South African Finance Minister. Coming up, we are going to dive into the European markets and the impact of Trump's new tariffs with our next guest, Valérie Noël, trading head of Seas Group. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. European stock futures lower this morning then following President Trump's announcement, at least threat of a 10% tariff on goods from the UK and EU countries, at least a number of EU countries, supporting Greenland. Let's bring in right now Valérie Noël, head of trading at Seas Group, for a take on the market reaction. Valérie, how should markets and traders be thinking about this? This additional 10% is not in place yet. The threat is it kicks in from February the 1st, and an additional threat that it ramps up to 25% by June. Is this a buy the dip moment, or is this a fundamental shift in how we should be thinking about the value of European stocks?
First of all, good morning, and thank you for having me today. Yes, well, as you said, what's a crazy 48 hours we just had. I think we need to have a step back. We know that Donald Trump is going always, a big announcement about tariff and everything, and then it's give the time and the moment to negotiate. And so I think this week we probably going to have more news about those tariffs, but I think we should not rush about saying that the tariff will be effective at the amount he said. But obviously this morning the future already done in European market.
Yeah, well, and let's go there then, Valérie. In terms of there's been outperformance year to date, European stocks versus the S&P 500. Does that story come to a screeching halt then? I mean, there's still a lot more details we need to fill in, to your point, but at least for now, does that end that divergence that we've seen?
Well, I think people, really need to have diversification. We have seen last year, the Max 7 was very predominant, and people were looking for diversification. With Europe, Europe was doing better than it was doing the year before. With Asia also, and also inside the U.S. market. We have also seen in U.S., people coming out for the S&P for example, the S&P equal weight. So I think people are going to still continue to diversify. This also show you why it's that important to have a diversified portfolio. And obviously, you can see the metals. I mean, that's going to help, again, gold and silver to probably going higher, as is very good diversification, a good insurance. And I think, as you said, more details will come probably this week. They're almost all of them in Davos. So I hope they're going to be able to talk and find a solution or something more clear on the matter.
At least longer term, or at least medium to longer term, Valérie, does this accelerate the de-dollarization story?
Well, what we have seen is like a central bank, now they got more gold than US in their vault. So, at some stage, I'm not sure it's got de-dollarization, but you need to be sure with who you trade, and that's adding uncertainties. That's going to add volatility. So, yeah, the dollar this morning. Well, I checked more the Swiss franc this morning. That it's a safe haven. You can see euro is going a little bit down, and yes, you need to know with who you trade. And I have to say it's an unknown story. All this new world is an unknown story. And the market, we had to follow this, but we have a lot of leverage also on those markets. So we have some big spike, and that, this leverage make those big spike on the market. So it's, as I said, it's an unknown, and that's the new things we need to deal with.
Does Asia offer greater resilience versus Europe or the US?
Yeah, well, we were very positive on China as an example last year. So what we just have done is just diversify a little bit this portfolio in Asia and be more GCC. We like GCC, we like LATAM, we like Eastern Europe. So I think also in Asia, you can diversify without being only on one market.
Okay, and back to Europe, Valérie, do you have a preference?
Sorry.
Yeah, every continent has its own issues, certainly. And we're seeing a reminder of some of the challenges in the Chinese data today. When it comes to Europe, what is your sector preference? I mean, we're thinking you can make the argument that the banks and defence stocks could hold up slightly better than the exporters, at least in the short term. Where is your sector preference in European stocks at this point?
I think what we have seen, even last week, we have very good numbers, as an example, on Richemont for the Lux. But if some tariff is adding, so yes, bank was good, but also the economy, start to be very good from last year. So we could have a good diversification. Defense, everyone talk about defense, about Lux, about industrial. So Europe are more diversified than US. That's why they took a little bit some money out from US to go in Europe as of diversification. But now with everything happened, I think people have to step back and go to the white paper and check which company can go through this. As also, if I understand well, it didn't touch every country. It just picked up some country in Europe. So some will have more advantage than the other one.
Mm. OK, Valérie, thank you for your insights on, as you said, a pretty extraordinary day once again for global markets. Valérie Noël, head of trading at Seas Group. Coming up, at least 21 people die after two high-speed trains crash in Spain. We'll bring you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, to some other stories that we are following this morning. A high-speed train has derailed, jumping onto the opposite track and slamming into an oncoming train in southern Spain, killing at least 21 people. The crash happened last night when the tail end of a service travelling from Malaga to Madrid went off the rails near Cordoba. Spain's transport minister called the crash, quote, a truly strange incident because it happened on a straight stretch of track that had been renovated in May. The European Union and Mercosur have officially signed one of the world's largest free trade agreements over the weekend. It's a deal that has been in the works for more than 2 decades. The agreement will create an integrated market of 780 million consumers and will strengthen Europe's foothold in a resource-rich region and signal independence from the US and China. Portugal is set for its first presidential election runoff in 40 years. According to exit polls, former Socialist Party leader António José Seguro took between 30 and 35% of the vote in the first round on Sunday. He could end up facing André Ventura, who heads the far-right opposition in Parliament. Portugal's presidency is largely ceremonial, although it does have the power to dissolve Parliament. Sources say the US is moving to boost law enforcement in Minneapolis. A US official told Bloomberg that the Pentagon has ordered 1,500 troops to prepare for possible deployment to Minnesota. The FBI is also seeking volunteers for temporary transfer. Minneapolis has become, of course, a focal point of anti-ICE protests since an officer shot and killed Rene Good on January the 7th. Let's switch focus right now to check in on the markets on a risk-off day, certainly when you look at US and European futures, on this presidential threat from President Trump of 10% additional tariffs on 8 European nations, including the likes of France, Germany, Scandinavia and the UK, of course. European futures then pointing lower by a little over 1% in this risk-off move. US futures pointing lower as well, 0.8% on S&P E-minis. The US market, of course, closed for President's Day. Gold is rallying, as is silver. Gold up 1.6%. At $4,671 per troy ounce. Coming up, thousands rally against Trump's Greenland takeover ambitions as he takes aim at the island's European allies. The details are next. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie with your top stories. Stock futures fall and havens surge as President Trump threatens new tariffs on European allies in his pursuit of a Greenland takeover. Fury in European capitals, with leaders set to hold an emergency meeting to discuss retaliatory measures. French President Emmanuel Macron calls for Europe to use its trade bazooka against the US. Plus, China's economic momentum weakens despite meeting its 5% GDP goal. Another year of lopsided growth for the world's second biggest economy. So it's risk off across markets. Yes, you're seeing a little bit of resilience when it comes to South Korea and the Kospi. That is the AI trade, the momentum there. But broadly, of course, when you look at European futures and US futures, risk off with this additional threat of 10% tariffs from President Trump. Are we closing in then to economic war between Europe and the US? The tariffs are not yet imposed, of course, that is the context, but they could come through on February the 1st. No doubt the president will be at the centre of attention during Davos, and question marks as to whether or not they can resolve these tensions. European futures then down 1.2%, having outperformed year to date their US counterparts. S&P E-minis down 0.8%. It's a holiday, of course, national holiday in the US. Gold and silver rallying in this haven trade, and the Swissy gaining as well. Interestingly, the euro is also getting a bid. Is de-dollarization back and front and centre for investors? Gold up 1.6%. Time now for your front page news as well. All leading on Trump's proposed new tariffs, of course, on European countries and his allies. The Financial Times says EU countries are considering hitting the US with 93 billion euros in tariffs, or restricting American companies from the bloc's market in potential retaliation for new levies. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal says Europe is bracing for a new trade fight with Trump. It outlines the options from retaliatory tariffs to the never-before-used so-called bazooka, saying European leaders have a slate to choose from in responding to US threats over Greenland. And finally, Bild's take from Germany, based on the context of Donald Trump's career and business philosophy. The book that best fits the description of explaining this strategy is Trump, The Art of the Deal. We'll see if they get to that deal. Of course, you can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers, of course, can go to DAYB Go on the terminal. We're showing a chart right now of the odds adjusting for the Federal Reserve and who President Trump may pick. Reports over the weekend that Rick Ryder of BlackRock has become a serious contender, and that possibly Kevin Hassett has become less of a chance in terms of taking that role. So the adjusting and changing take in terms of the potential next Fed chair. Let's get back to what's been happening. You see the rallies right now. That happened over the weekend, of course, in both Copenhagen and in Greenland itself. Thousands of people rallying in Denmark's capital over the weekend, protesting Trump's aggressive stance towards Greenland, shaking the foundations of the NATO alliance after he pledged a barrage of new tariffs over his ambitions for the island. Italy's Prime Minister strongly criticising Trump's actions while on a visit to South Korea.
I wanted to tell you that the prediction of an increase in tariffs against those nations that have chosen to contribute to the security of Greenland, in my opinion, is a mistake. And obviously, I do not agree with it. As I've told you many times, I share the attention that the American presidency gives to Greenland and the Arctic in general, which is a strategic area in which excessive interference by actors who may be hostile must clearly be avoided. But I believe that in this sense, we should read the will of some European countries to send troops to participate in greater security, not in the sense of an initiative taken against the United States, but rather against the other actors.
Well, let's bring in Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook and Copenhagen bureau chief Siara Stjålen. Let's start, Ollie, with you. Strong words there from Melody. Interestingly, of course, she's seen as someone pretty close to the Trump administration. Europe clearly is not happy, and for now, there is unity.
There seems to be unity, Tom. That's right. And it's actually a really broad unity across much of the political spectrum in Europe that we've not necessarily seen in recent years, which has really been a landscape that's been quite fractured. But that's what we heard from Giorgia Meloni. We've heard out on Twitter from the Swedish Prime Minister out over the last couple of minutes saying we will not be blackmailed, that the EU will stand firm. And that adds to comments that we also heard from the European Council President, who put out a statement yesterday saying that the principles of international law, territorial integrity and national sovereignty, that the European Union is completely unified on that. They will continue continue to act in solidarity with Denmark and Greenland, then they have readiness to defend themselves against any form of coercion. That being said, that they're still willing to work with the United States as a partner because, of course, the Europeans do not want to needlessly escalate the situation with the United States. But we seem to be approaching a moment here, Tom, with that 10% threat of tariffs that are kicking in basically in 2 weeks' time if the Trump president is to be believed. 10% tariffs on those 8 nations: Norway, Denmark, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Finland. If he is to believe that that is going to happen on February the 1st, this provokes for the Europeans, I think, a very uncomfortable question, which is, where is the red line here? Because as we've discussed over the last year, and I've talked to many policymakers, there is this sense that any trade deal that you strike with the United States, no deal is a final trade deal. So if this trade war will be basically reignited whenever the president of the United States wants something, in this case Greenland, what is the value of these trade deals? And at what point will the Europeans draw the red line? There are, of course, massive economic costs that would come to that for the Europeans. There are some costs also for the United States. So there are things being considered whether or not the Europeans will retaliate with that 93 billion euros worth of retaliatory tariffs that are still on hold. The Europeans will consider bringing that in. There's also Emmanuel Macron talking about the so-called trade bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument that the Europeans should invoke, put that on the table in order to play hardball with the United States. But that obviously carries that economic risk, but it also carries geopolitical risk. The Europeans are still dependent on the United States to sell weapons to Ukraine, to give intelligence to the Ukrainians. So that is a very delicate balance that the Europeans are currently trying to navigate and will continue to navigate on Thursday when they meet here in Brussels for that emergency meeting that has been called by the European Council.
Yeah, we're watching that meeting very closely. Sarah, let's bring you in at this point. There have been demonstrations, of course, over the weekend in both Greenland and in Denmark. What is the mood on the ground in a country who's sent forces, military personnel to fight and die for the US and Afghanistan? What is the mood right now in Denmark?
Well, you're hitting on some of the important points there, Tom. There's, I think right now, just a sense of being really overwhelmed. This has been going on for 2 weeks now, but basically a full year. And we feel like we haven't really done anything to deserve that. So has same sentiments for the Greenlanders. So obviously a lot of anger, hurt, distrust towards the US. As you rightly said, Oliver, this is a trade deal. But can you really trust any deals you negotiate with the US? There was a delegation from Denmark that went to Washington last week, and the sentiment after that was a bit of a relief. They came out of the meeting feeling they set up a working group. Now there was a diplomatic path forward, and maybe they could hash out some of the disagreements and figure out a better solution than the stalemate we're in right now. And then we have these developments over the weekend. There's just a lot of bewilderment here. We can't really quite figure out how to get out of this situation. I went to the demonstration on Saturday that you showed video and some of the photos of, and it really struck me how scared the Greenlandic people are right now. They wake up every morning to a new post on social media, new threats, and they honestly don't know if they go to bed what the next day will bring. I think from us in Denmark, the feeling is obviously a bit different because we're not feeling the threat to ourselves the same way. But there was, on the stage, there were speeches with people crying. They were really overwhelmed, obviously, by the situation, but also overwhelmed by all the support they're getting from across Europe, all the nations that are sending military, the joint statement from the EU leaders. It really means something to them.
Yeah, that advisor to President Trump saying this is just simply a case, essentially, of strength and power, and that's what it comes down to. I wonder if the UK has any strength or power at this point, Ollie. Britain's Prime Minister, of course, has courted President Trump. This is a real test of the UK's foreign policy.
Absolutely, Tom, and we're going to hear from Keir Starmer a little bit later today. This morning, sort of hastily arranged comments to sort of address presumably the situation in Greenland. But of course, Keir Starmer's main sort of lever with the United States has not been any kind of real leverage, but it has been diplomatic leverage, and he has been able to bring some of that to bear. What I think is really very interesting here, Tom, is what we're seeing actually for the first time across Europe is a kind of fractured political landscape, some real unity. I mean, you have Nigel Farage coming out basically saying that he's against what Trump is is doing on Greenland. We have the same sort of commentary from the AfD in Germany, the far-right Alternative for Deutschland, Alice Weidel, and the other head of the party, both coming out saying basically the United States and Trump's approach of Wild West politics is not really acceptable. Jordan Bardella, the far-right in France, similar comments. You're actually having this strange sort of impact here across Europe, this unifying influence where it seems that many of these political parties who are actually quite anti-EU, quite certainly against the incumbent governments and quite pro-Trump are saying that this is actually a hair too far. So the effect that this might be having from the Trump administration is actually a massively unifying effect for the Europeans across a very difficult political spectrum, which is actually the last thing the Trump administration wants, as been pretty explicitly stated in their national security strategy that they released a couple of weeks ago.
It is fascinating, isn't it? So you see those right-wing parties across Europe rallying behind this message in terms of their concerns about what President Trump is doing. Sarah, when it comes to the military deployments we've seen in Greenland, look, they've been minimal in terms of numbers, but symbolic certainly. What is the latest in terms of boots on the ground in Greenland?
Yeah, we've seen some of the Germans. They've already come back home. There's talk about maybe deploying some soldiers from Canada. So this is going to be a permanent mission in nature. That's what the Danes have said. So they continue to rotate some military personnel to Greenland. And right now they're setting up training, some exercises, and having this what they call exploratory mission up there to figure out the best way forward. How many people do we need up there? What kind of material do we need? Have to remember, this is the Arctic. It's not just sending someone to the south of Italy and figure out a way to defend something. Like, you really need some special equipment and some specially trained troops up there. But the feeling is that any support from military personnel across Europe is most welcome. And the Greenlanders I talked to on Saturday, what they were saying, it's just not enough. We need way more than this.
OK. Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook, alongside Copenhagen bureau chief Sarah Sjolund. Thank you both for the latest. Let's get back to the market impacts then of these threats from President Trump. And you're seeing it pronounced in terms of the trade rate numbers coming through, focused on those European exporters. So LVMH, of course, the maker of luxury goods, falling 4.4% on TradeGate versus the Paris close. Mercedes-Benz falling 4% as well on TradeGate. And Volkswagen tumbling 4%. So the exporters, of course, in the crosshairs on these threats of additional tariffs and what it would mean for their exposure, of course, to the US market. Switching focus now, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, who has been appointed to the executive panel of Donald Trump's so-called Board of Peace, has distanced himself from the president's demand that countries pay $1 billion for permanent membership. Israel also voiced rare objections to parts of the US president's plan for the region. Bloomberg's Dan Williams is in Jerusalem. Dan, get us up to speed with developments on this so-called Board of Peace.
Just to troubles on the ground in Gaza when it comes to converting that ceasefire into the envisaged peace deal, the long-term peace. Now there's troubles up in the upper reaches, the superstructure President Trump wants to manage to administer the Gaza plan. As you noted, there is a Board of Peace. That is the topmost board, the body that would be chaired by Trump. He's invited other world leaders to be on board, but according to a draft charter that Bloomberg saw, any permanent presence on that board would require $1 billion buy-in. It would also see Trump effectively bestriding what could be a rival or a competitor body to the United Nations. Meanwhile, the panel underneath the board, the executive board, which would directly have more of a hands-on international scrutiny of the government seen replacing Hamas in Gaza, the Palestinian government. That board now includes, according to the White House, a Qatari and Turkish representation. This is something Israel is not happy with. It sees those countries as too close to Hamas and not to be trusted when it comes to ousting Hamas as required by the plan. So over the weekend, rare recrimination from Israel. There's some trouble up top in this plan.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem with the latest on that front. Dan, thank you. Coming up, President Trump grabbing the spotlight, of course, once again as the global elite descends on Davos. We'll discuss how his latest tariff threat will shape this week's discussions in the mountains. That's coming up. This is Bloomberg. OK, let's get you up to speed on some other corporate news and hedge fund news as well. Chris Hone breaking the hedge fund profit record last year as rising stock and global market volatility helped the industry rack up $543 billion worth of gains. Hone's TCI fund management made a profit of an estimated $18.9 billion last year. That exceeds Ken Griffin's Citadel record set in 2022 and surpassed the $15 billion that John Paulson generated in 2007 on his bet against subprime mortgages. Meanwhile, Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to say that critics of the UK's capital markets were wrong as she heralds a, quote, new golden age for the city. She's set to speak at the London Stock Exchange today as new rules kick in to make it easier to raise public capital. In Britain, listed companies will now only need to produce a prospectus if they are raising 75% or more of existing share capital. That's up from 20%, with other measures to cut paperwork and costs also coming in. And home sellers here in the UK have ramped up their asking prices at the sharpest price pace in more than a decade. This as confidence returns to the property market following Labour and the autumn budget, of course. Property website Rightmove says the average price of a newly listed home on its platform jumped 2.8% in recent weeks to just over £368,000. That was the largest monthly rise since July 2015. Now, President Trump's visit to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland this week is set to be nothing short of dramatic after an escalation of trade tensions sparked by his pursuit of Greenland. Let's bring in Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jemana Pasechi, who is on the ground for us in Davos. Wow, what a moment, Jemana. Trump then, of course, set to speak on Wednesday. He's going to be accompanied by, what, the biggest US delegation ever? How do we see all this unfolding? This is going to be quite the few days at the World Economic Forum.
That's right, Tom. And you might be surprised to hear that the theme of this year's Davos dialogue is the spirit of dialogue. Quite literally that. It's about bringing people together to talk about the pressing issues of the day, as it always has been. But the paradox being, of course, that even in the West's own global risk report, they talk about headwinds to multilateralism, the fact that transparency, respect of rule of law, that trust in institutions all on the decline. Even if you look at the top biggest two risks over the next 2 years, number one is geoeconomic fragmentation, and number two is state-based armed conflict. So central to all of this, of course, is this new sheriff in town, President Trump, coming in and upending the world order as we know it. And he is descending on Davos on Wednesday, bringing a massive delegation with him. In fact, it is the largest U.S. delegation that has ever come to Davos. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is coming alongside him. His trade representative, Jamison Greer, and, of course, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be here as well. You were just talking about the establishment of the Board of Peace, so lots of questions about that. So he will be giving his seminal speech on Wednesday. We're expecting a lot of focus on some domestic priorities. Remember, this is a big political year for President Trump, in addition to, of course, the conversation and dialogue with Europe at the moment and what the plans are vis-a-vis Greenland, and, of course, the weaponization of tariffs and where that all leads to, in addition to perhaps maybe some remarks on the Middle East as well. You never quite know where a Trump speech is going to go, but all eyes are going to be on that speech in particular. And it is a very big presence this year. Also got to note that there is a church just outside the Congress up here. It's called the Sanctuary. They've converted it this year into something called USA House. And apparently there are going to be quite a few events going on there over the next couple of days as well.
OK, in a church. OK, USA House. I'm surprised they didn't go with Trump House, but maybe they'll stick with USA House for now. Which other members of the elite are going to be there that you're going to be speaking to, that you're going to be focused on?
Look, I will say that this is also a very highly attended Davos. You've got over 3,000 leaders, 65 heads of state. 6 out of the 7 G7 leaders are going to be here. So there are also going to be speeches from Mark Carney. Watch out for that on Tuesday. He's back from his trip from Qatar. Von der Leyen, obviously, given what's happening with Greenland. NATO Secretary General, you want to watch out for that, too. And then Thursday, we get the initial response out of Europe to the Trump speech from the Chancellor Friedrich Merz. So there are going to be a lot of speeches to watch out for. I will say from the Middle East perspective, also very big representation here too. Later on today, we're going to be speaking to the Mubadala CEO and alongside some other heads of state this week, including the Qatari PM, obviously pivotal with some of the developments in the region. And then finally, don't forget huge tech representatives as well. Jensen Huang is here, and Microsoft Satya Nadella is here, as well as the founder of Anthropic. So still, many people are attending Davos. But again, President Trump will probably steal the show, as he always does on Wednesday, Tom.
OK, Jemana, fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. An important setup. Jemana Pasechi is going to have a busy week, of course, on the ground for us in Davos. We are going to be having, of course, extensive coverage from the World Economic Forum this week. We're going to bring you those interviews with top business leaders and heads of state, as Jemana was saying. Highlights today include Investcorp Executive Chair Mohamed Al-Adi. We're going to also hear from Franklin Templeton's CEO, Jenny Johnson, and HSBC Bank CEO Michael Roberts. If you have your phone to hand, take a photo of this QR code then to sign up for Bloomberg's Economics Daily newsletter. Arguably never more important. Subscribe for special on-the-ground coverage from the World Economic Forum in Davos this week. There's a lot more coming up. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Greenland is essential to the U.S. national security. We're building the Golden Dome, the missile system. And look, President Trump is being strategic. He's looking beyond this year. He's looking beyond next year to what could happen for a battle in the Arctic. We are not going to outsource our national security. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to other countries.
OK, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent there outlining some of the rationale for the focus on Greenland, overlooking somewhat the reality that the majority of people in both Greenland and Denmark do not, of course, want Greenland to be taken over by the United States. The market impact is being felt. We're seeing that in terms of the trade rate numbers being flagged, at least for some of the exporter stocks, the luxury names and autos. So we're going to be watching those certainly at the open, 8 a.m. UK time, across the benchmark, when we have seen this outperformance in terms of the benchmark European stocks year to date versus the US counterparts. But again, we're going to be focusing very much on those exporters. So the auto sector, that's represented by the blue line here, likely to come under pressure today on this threat of 10% tariffs kicking on February the 1st. Luxury stocks as well, exposed, of course, to that key US market. And you can expect a hit for some of the key luxury names on that threat of additional levies. Let's flip the board and have a look at how you may want to position across sectors in Europe. There is an argument being made from some investors that both defence stocks and bank stocks will provide something of a haven in this environment then. And so you have that reflected in terms of the gains coming through for defence names in Europe. That ties in, of course, to the geopolitical risks. Banks have performed very well in 2025. Maybe that's where you want to position across the European space in light of these additional threats. At least that is the rationale from some investors out there. Here's what else to think about through the risk events through this week. On Wednesday, it's the big one. President Donald Trump, of course, at Davos with that speech. On Thursday, we're going to get US core PCE, that inflation gauge. And on the Friday, the BOJ will come through with their rate decision. The opening trade is up next. This is Bloomberg.